Good evening. I appreciate all of you guys' being patient and waiting for this to start. We had the priest's Mardi Gras right here at the bishop's house, and it ended just a few minutes ago. So, starting a little bit late tonight, I don't have a rant prepared for you because I was too busy. Hanging out with some priests, especially some priests who are coming from a long ways out of town, and I don't get to see all that often. So, priests Mardi Gras would happen on a Monday because that's the day off that we have. But Ash Wednesday is coming, and so the time for fasting is coming, which means we need to feast in the front of it. And I'm sure if Mr. Mark Lefebvre were here, he could tell us all about how that is a great way to emphasize contrast. But he abandoned me last week, and maybe he'll abandon me this week. Who knows? Okay, yeah. So Mr. Andrew here. While the music was playing for the intro, I was on the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, and we were talking about basically Catholics joining other churches, and I think it was Jean who hangs out around Bridges of Meaning fairly often. He was talking about the inroads that the Pentecostals and the evangelicals are making in traditionally Catholic countries south of the border and all of that. Interesting thing about it, canonically, is that for whatever reason we don't apply the penalty of schism to people who attend another church, only if they adopt some kind of leadership position in that church would we ordinarily apply a penalty of schism there. Uh, so that's your little canonical tidbit right there. People can go to a non-Catholic church for decades and not set foot in a Catholic church for decades, and they're still only one good confession away from being fully reunited with the church, assuming they haven't gotten themselves into any other canonical trouble. So that's just your canon law tidbit. You're back at home now, Mark.
I am. Unfortunately, my dragon broke. Fell right off the
Oh.
door, smashed into a zillion pieces. So
That is actually pretty tragic. That was one of your cosmic space dragons, right?
well, I mean, that was probably the basis and inspiration for Sally Joe's Space Dragons, yes.
Okay. So that was the
I was
protogenitor of the cosmic space dragons.
yeah, I had that since I was probably 15 years old. I've had it forever. So it's sad to see it go, but
Hello, Jim. Also at work, I'm sure.
yeah, it's
Oh.
it's always funny to me when people talk about Catholics and it's like they clearly are fundamentalist Protestants who only
No, no,
understand legalism and don't understand
I mean,
Catholicism.
the Catholic Church expects you to go to mass every Sunday at a Catholic church. Like that's a law. That's written down in the code. It's been a law in the West since the 6th century. So it is there, but no, it was more like Jean. I don't know if you've ever interacted with Jean. He's an
Many
interesting
times.
fellow. Okay, all right. Yeah, he's an interesting
In
fella. It'd be great if he's
interesting
hopped
is
on
the
here.
correct word.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It'd be great if he hopped on here. He's always fun to talk to. He was like, "Why aren't Catholics doing anything about it?" And it's like, because we're a bunch of Muppets and we love losing.
Well,
Sorry about that, guys.
yeah, to some extent. Yeah. I mean also a lot of these things just don't meet the requirement. Like almost all Protestants think that if you have an idea about the Bible different from your church that you're heretical. And I'm like, no.
Well, we need to draw a distinction between material heresy and formal heresy, right? So, like, material heresy is this is incorrect, demonstrably incorrect. Formal heresy only happens when you're like actually resisting correction, and that's what gets you into trouble. But like, people are incorrect all the time. It just
Well,
kind of
and
happens.
heresy is teaching, not what you have in your head or telling your buddy. It's like being out there and stating it publicly. That's when it's heresy.
Yeah. So formal Sally Joe, as in the hylomorphism of Aristotle. So
No, I
like you've
think
got the matter, you've got the things that could turn into heresy, but it only becomes formally and like receives its true eidos, its true structural functional organization as heresy when you resist correction by a proper authority.
no, when it's in a suit. I think Sally's definition is far more correct, Father.
Hello.
Hello, Kirk. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Doing all right.
I wasn't here from the beginning. What were you and Mark just chatting about?
We're talking about heresy and how it's harder to get in trouble for heresy in the Catholic Church than some people think.
Yeah. I mean, heresy. I don't know much about the Catholic position on that, but
I mean, generally against, but like most people don't need to worry about it.
okay, that's
Uh,
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think outside the Catholic, Orthodox, and Anglos anybody can have a position about that because they don't even have a structure that could enforce such a thing. This cracks me up.
Well, they do. I mean, they do actually, as far as I could tell, you can actually be expelled from a church, but it's I don't know. That's their problem. I don't deal with it.
They don't have a heresy thing though. They expel people all that's the other part. You want high filters. The Protestants, like it's way
Depending on the
harder.
flavor of Protestant, I don't think our evangelical megachurches, whose theology is a mile wide and an inch deep, are expelling a lot of people for heresy.
Mhm.
Like the 5,000 people that file into their auditoriums every Sunday.
Wait, did you
You
just
can't.
say? Sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, you just can't police that many people effectively
Right.
with the way that they're running things. And maybe that's actually a good thing. Like they're just, this is kind of like the antechamber and like these evangelical churches have pretty high churn. And if they're churning to a place that is a little more, solid, let's say, that then the high churn isn't actually a bad thing. This is like kind of the net where we catch people and then we can get them into a place with a little more structure there. I would like to imitate that as a Catholic somehow, but I just don't know how yet. So
Yeah.
the big nets. That's all I want to imitate is the big nets.
Yeah. Did you just call their theology a mile wide and an inch deep?
I'm thinking specifically of big evangelical churches.
Yeah.
The
And
megachurch
and I'm not
types?
basing this based on my own prejudices, although that's always possible because I'm a Muppet and I have considered it. Um, but I am a lot of times basing it on people who I've encountered and like talked to, and they say I went there for 3 or 4 years, and like it helped me at the time, and it was the message I needed, but like I found that there wasn't much there um,
Right.
to sustain me for my life long. So it's not. This isn't just a Catholic misunderstanding things. This is a Catholic talking to people who say that these big mega churches specifically. Now we come with Bruce, we come with the Reformed tradition where they got big thick books, they got universities, they've got spiritual classics, they may even have useful practices. I'm not sure. I'd be interested to hear about that. What sorts of spiritual practices are common among the Reformed tradition? They might have a little more meat there, and I'll acknowledge that when I see it.
Yeah. What does I know what like an inch deep means. Like you're saying the theology is shallow, to my understanding. But what does a mile wide mean?
I don't know. It's a phrase that I picked.
No, it
Covers
just
a lot of ground,
yeah, it
but
covers
doesn't go that
a
deep.
lot of things. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all it means. It's a lot of coverage. Most of
Unlike
it's
the
gonna have
ocean of Catholic theology, which is like, I'm not getting to the bottom of this anytime soon. Um, Alrighty, Sally Joe's got an idea for me. The 20-something Friday night Christian service with free day-old Panera bread rolls did get a lot of couples together at the New Life in Colorado.
there you go.
See, it's simple enough. Well, here's the thing. There's this new group well, it's not a new group, but it's new to Fargo called Communio. And they've got the approval from the bishop to be doing their things here. The pastors are welcoming them. They're integrating their program as a part of the life of the parish. And by golly, they've got some kind of magic sauce to actually get people to show up to things. Like I'm really, and I'm friends with somebody who now works full time in this in one of the churches, right? So like this is so I'm gonna like as soon as I get a hold of him next, I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna figure out what the magic sauce is that they get where they like just schedule a trivia night at a bar and get 80 people to show up and run out of food.
Yeah, that's all you have to do. That's it. That's the whole. You can if you just want a hook. Hooks are easy because you can just copy them from other hooks. Right. The question is how do you keep them?
Yeah, yeah. We'll see. We'll see.
So the hook.
They've got plans for that too. They've got like long-term
Yeah, yeah.
follow-up programs with the hooks there. I want to answer Andrew Bison's no, this is it might be related, but Communio, the journal, was a journal founded in the 1970s by um, Cardinal Ratzinger and Hanser von Balthasar and other friends who wanted to keep the Second Vatican Council and also stay inside the Catholic Church. In the bounds of orthodoxy. It's I don't believe they're related, but hey, I could be wrong, right? This is nobody can really copyright that word.
Who's Larry Chap?
Larry Chapp is a Catholic theologian and public thinker. He's actually been on he's been on Paul Vanderklay's channel and he's been on Grail Country, and Mark's probably seen him and lost his mind at him because no, he doesn't know anything. Okay.
No.
No,
I
oh,
don't watch
it's
the
somebody.
discussions.
Yeah, it's somebody else that. Yeah, and so I don't know. Larry Chapp's fine by me. It's not my favorite. I don't have anything in particular against him. He seems a little boomerish. That comes with a certain age.
Is
Yeah,
Mark very anti-boomer?
Mark is very pro goodness.
There you go.
Um,
Thank you.
he hates identifying against things. So I had to come up with a positive formulation. Yeah, Bruce, you got a little bit of echo going on there, so just got to
Good
get
job,
those
Bruce.
headphones calibrated.
It's got all
You know,
this silly audio equipment.
As nice as my voice is, I don't want to hear it echoing back to me.
yeah. Fazio, could I ask you a question about heresy real quick?
Sure.
So, I'm friends with the person on Discord, and his name is Matt. I'm not gonna give his last name, but like we're part of a philosophy Discord server. He was at Drew University, now he's at the New School, and basically to tie us into heresy was in the Catholic Church. So basically we study like a lot of philosophy on this Discord server with Matt, and he considers himself Roman Catholic and a member of the Roman Catholic Church, but he says the reason he's Roman Catholic is not because he like believes in like the traditional literal view of revelation as like God speaking to Moses, or like God like literally revealing himself within Jesus, but instead because he takes from Zizek and Hegel and Lacan the idea that like there's a dialectic between the universal and the particular, and because in the Roman Catholic like communion you basically have the universal of God being manifested in the particular of like the communion wafer and the blood of Christ and the wine. Basically, that sort of like Zizekian, Hegelian, Lacanian philosophy, like his opinion resonates with that Catholic tradition. So I don't know if he would be considered like within like Roman, like non-heretical ideology.
So, I
Heresy is
mean,
teaching. It has nothing to do with your personal belief ever. No one cares about your personal belief. Also, yes, the Khan and Zizek and those retards stole it from the Catholic Church. Of course they did.
yeah, I would say that I don't find my foundations like that. I didn't find my foundations like that.
From the
My
people who came
plot,
later?
yeah,
From the
yeah.
people who
I
copied the thing that was earlier? Really?
allow me to
What a
answer.
weird
Allow
way
me to
not to
answer
find
Kirk's question here,
foundations.
Mark. Allow me to answer. I find it just because Jesus told me that you know, take and eat. This is my body. This is the cup of my blood of the new covenant. I just kind of, and I was a kid when I was being taught these things, and so it's interesting to me that somebody would try and have their foundation of faith on thinkers like Zizek and Lacan. And like maybe we got the hook of this guy, and we can, if he's willing to submit to the laws of the church and maintain communion with the Roman Pontiff and the College of Bishops, maybe we can work with this guy a little bit. But that isn't how I would find the basis of my faith. So that's kind of my reaction to that.
I understand, but he wouldn't really be considered a heretic.
We might be able to find some. I want to talk to this guy first, right? I'm not going to start throwing stones at him because, maybe when he has an opportunity to explain himself, he might explain himself a little bit differently. But we need to go back to that distinction between material heresy, where somebody's just incorrect, and formal heresy, where they're resisting correction on account on behalf of no resisting correction from an established authority of the church, which is where you really get in trouble. Which might be another way of understanding Mark saying that heresy is about teaching, because why would you ever get corrected? It's because you're leading people astray.
Right.
So basically, like, the church isn't going to go and police every Discord server in the world, because that's dumb and nobody cares.
Well, everybody wants to be seen and important, and so they think that heresy would give them that, and it's not even how any of that ever worked, which is just hysterical to me. It's like wanting the CIA to spy on you.
What do you think of my idea? My FBI agent loves me.
Exactly. No one cares.
So what
no
do you
one knows
think
who you
of
are.
Mary is viewed as the archetype of the divine feminine. Long as you believe that the archetype was really alive in Nazareth, did really conceive our Lord as a virgin, in time and space, as long as your understanding of archetype doesn't deny that, then I could roll with it. Sure. I wouldn't speak in that language. I don't think it's the traditional language of the church, because instead of praying to an archetype and venerating an archetype, we venerate a person. And if an archetype helps you understand that, then I suppose that's fine. I'm not going to lose my mind over it over the internet, right?
Yeah, I think he means more the manifestation of the archetype, or the representation of the archetype. But yeah, archetype's a psychological term that's, I mean, I agree with it. I think it's dead on. You could add a little more flavor, but yeah, I mean, I think that's why I make the Anglo-Cathodoxy distinction, right? Like, specifically Mary is why, not only Mary, but that is so much different from everything else that I think it's fantastically important. And if you wanted to use a psychological lens, which Peterson sort of forced everybody into to some degree, for better or for worse, I think for better, then yeah, you'd have to frame it that way. But to your point, Father, there's better.
Yeah, I think it's
Christian language.
I think yeah. I think you I don't want to say that Our Lady is a manifestation of the archetype. I want to say that the archetype that you have in between your ears is a manifestation of Our Lady, basically, insofar as it's because she's the highest of all creation,
Yeah.
Mark.
Right. But in psychology, because it's individualistic, the only way you break out of that frame in psychology is with the words like archetype. There might be some others, but actually I can't think of any that aren't about the person. That just might be me being flaky, but archetype is a non-material, outside of you thing in psychology. And it's one of the few, it might be the only one actually, but it's certainly one of the few things that isn't framed within your head, because psychology is highly individualistic framing, right? It's so narcissistic way to think about the world. it's almost madness to think about the world in terms of psychology alone, or to think about any part of the world in terms of psychology, right? Because it's really self-referencing.
Yeah. And so if you find this exploration of archetypes to be useful with meeting crisis folks, Mark, then I've never told you not to talk like that. I've always said anytime somebody brings up the divine feminine as such, that's Mark's thing. And I talk about Our Lady or the church.
Right.
So just to be clear. Hello, Silas.
Hello, how are you, Father?
Doing well. I'm having my pre-Mardi Gras night tonight.
Oh boy, you better eat
We had our
tomorrow.
priests, yeah, and then the regular Mardi Gras tomorrow with the Catholic Women Club. I go and hear their confessions, and then they feed me. It's a good deal. Yeah. So, 'tis the season. 'Tis the season for such things.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, Ron can come on here and say something soon. Make sure that he's not.
Could be a troll bot.
Could be a troll bot. We got our eyes on you, Ron. You better not be trolling.
No, he doesn't love us.
Ron.
I bet Bruce loves us, though. What's going on, Bruce?
Hey, I'm sorry about the audio issue. Trying to get my AirPods to connect and StreamYard stinks. So, you know. So I'm listening to you on a speaker like a Luddite. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
You're soldering something right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to fix some guitar electronics.
Neat.
It's kind of like a hobby of mine, and it's something to do with my hands when it's really cold and I don't feel like being outside doing wood or something like that. This is sort of a fun thing to do when I'm using my brain all day. I get to use my hands, something interesting,
Nice.
But what you were saying earlier, I really appreciate, and I hate to use the term resonate with because it's such a strange thing to say, but agree with. The psychologizing of theological terms or truths to me is really distasteful. I understand why people do it though, but that's not my language. So that's their language, and so it's sort of psychology has sort of an allergy to religion to some degree, and maybe I have an allergy to psychology to some degree.
Yeah.
But if you speak about Mary, you're speaking about a person who lived and is eternally alive, and so in that sense, the archetype is, I think, incomplete language, and it's just sort of what it does is it relativizes the life of Mary, the gospel itself, to some sort of individualistic pairing, which I think is a problem. And that happens across all of psychology, in my opinion. They're borrowing from the Christian worldview typically when they're doing psychology. And so that's the tools they have, But anyway, that's my soapbox.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think you could.
We'll
I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt. I was just gonna say you could make the argument that saints beget experiential grace in the sense that doing a devotion to a saint or a consecration to Mary allows a person to understand God better because they're observing certain aspects of God's completed handiwork. So you could say, to be fair in that regard, you could say that the archetype thing does make sense in that regard, in the sense that you're examining parts of the Blessed Virgin Mary's life and then applying that to yourself to kind of understand God better through his completed handiwork. Ephesians 2:10.
Yeah, if you want to use archetypes for that, but I think the language of participation would be a little more familiar to the church. It's certainly a very important concept in Aquinas that you would at least mentally or in terms of meditation, you might, resonate with some part of the Bible or the lives of the saints, and see yourself, in relation and understand. Well, you could understand that you're both participating in the same faith, right? The same faith of Christ and carrying the cross, and you might even be able to relate to the carrying of the cross in the same sort of way there. So if you want to use art, like this archetype stuff, I I've decided that if I ever have an opportunity to do a podcast with Dr. Peterson, that I'm gonna study up on Jung, and I'm gonna warn him that this is coming, right? I'll send an email to his people and say, hey, I think we need to talk about Jung, and I have generally negative opinions. And I think that would be like I think just having a conversation about that would be revelatory to people, especially Christians who are continually like, when's Dr. Peterson gonna become Catholic? And it's
Yeah.
like, ah, guys, like, look, he's got some good advice, he's got some good insights, he's having a generally positive effect on people, but I'm not going to, yeah, he's a long ways away. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's what I would do if I got to talk to Dr. Peterson, but I'm just the director of liturgy for the Diocese of Fargo with my silly little podcast here. So here we go.
You're in North Dakota?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Catholics out there, or is it kind of small?
I'd say the majority is one flavor of Lutheran or another. But the Catholics are in second place to the Lutherans there, and we're better organized. So
Okay.
yeah, I think in our diocese we've got like 70 to 80,000 Catholics.
Are they confessional Lutherans, or are they like evangelical Lutherans?
You get both. You've got a lot of Norwegian, like it depends on what town you're in, right? If you're in a Norwegian town, the ELCA church is going to be bigger. And if you're in a German town, the Missouri Synod Church is going to be bigger. So it kind of depends on who's at it. And then there's Catholic towns where like the Catholics are the biggest church in town. So it's yeah, it's not all just desolate prairie. It's desolate prairie with all sorts of interesting people on it.
Hmm.
So that's yeah. Some stuff ripping off a rose pet. Appreciate it. Also more of a little kid thing. Philosophical language versus religious heritage.
Religious heritage. Yeah.
The effect of this person talking to Mary is that all demonic activity leaves immediately. Yeah, demons don't like Mary, that's for sure.
Yeah.
She is I think it was said to an exorcist during a session that every Hail Mary they pray during the rosary is like a hammer hitting him on the head.
Right.
So yeah, they hate her humility.
Well, they hate that they can't get her too. I mean, that's what he said to the serpent in Genesis 3. He said, well, you're not getting her. And I think his pride, he's like, I can't get her.
But that's a funny thing about these exorcists, right? I've listened to them talk. I'm not the diocesan exorcist. Things get too weird. I'm going to call in the big guns, to help me deal with this stuff. But basically, it seems like all of your deliverance prayers are basically just taking the demon and rubbing it in his nose that he's already lost and he has no possibility of winning.
Yeah.
And just doing that over and over again until they decide to leave.
Yeah.
Which I don't know how else you would actually engage in combat against a pure spirit. So I guess it makes sense. But watching The Exorcist did not prepare me well for that truth there.
All right. Let me ask you a question. I was in a youth group with a couple people, and there's this one guy, and he said, an exorcist told him it's a sin to say the names of pagan, quote unquote, lowercase g gods in the Bible, and I was like, "Are you sure about that?"
I mean, it would be a sin to invoke them, but
right.
to simply pronounce the words or to speak about them. Yeah, I'm sure the kid in your youth group probably misunderstood what the exorcist said, or they found some grifter on YouTube that was pretending to be an exorcist and really wasn't. So,
Probably. Because he was saying, I was talking about Elijah when he was making fun of Baal in the Bible, and he's like, "No, you can't say Baal. You can't say Baal."
that's
You can say Baal. You just can't. You can't ask Baal for things, but it
Right.
doesn't really matter
Yeah.
because he's on the toilet.
Right,
As
right.
that's,
All right.
that's what he says to him.
he,
It's like maybe your God
he
Baal's
may
on
be
the toilet.
meditating right now.
Right. Well, I know they had that cartoon where they portrayed it, and they just had him be like, maybe he just got bored. Maybe he just got scared.
Did that cartoon also show the children of Israel slitting the throats of the 400 prophets of Baal?
I think they might have left that part out.
Oh man, that's what the kids would have been really into. You know, the
I think
river
it was a
starts flowing red with
Protestant
blood.
cartoon. Given that it was a Protestant cartoon, they probably left that where they left the Book of Maccabees.
This would be a little too much for the children. Yeah. I tell you what, my favorite story in the Bible that doesn't get adapted into cartoons is the 40 youths mocking Elisha for his bald head. And then Elisha curses them and they get mauled by she bears. That's a good Bible story right there. But it's another one that doesn't get made into cartoons, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So that's what we're dealing with these days. Cartoons with the jawbone retributions. Yeah, Samson slaying 200 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. That's our Samson for you. Also, VeggieTales. I got a soft spot in my heart for VeggieTales, but they did sanitize the Bible stories a little bit. Like when David killed Goliath, he just kind of knocked him out. They didn't actually sack the city of Jericho. Like all the citizens of Jericho just ran away. King George didn't commit adultery. He just stole somebody's rubber ducky.
Well, they have censors, unfortunately. So, or maybe not,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but.
Well, but that all comes out of the Protestantism, right, and the psychology, because according to psychology, you don't want to damage the individual child in particular, right? And so you sanitize the stories, which takes out all the good information and removes all the contrast, right? And that's what sort of starts this this whole cycle. And is the psychologizing and because psychology is individualistic, it's the focus on that individual, and then they wonder why they have L. Ron Hubbard and Dianetics. I'm like, Dianetics is just an extension of Freud and Jung. Like, seriously, like it goes in a different direction, but like it's actually just ripping them off and leaving a bunch of stuff out, which I think that's kind of hysterical that people don't actually realize what's going on there.
They're taking some of the shocking stuff out and some of the stuff that would legitimately take a child's innocence away. And
Right.
like there are certain stages of development when you want to preserve a child's innocence because that's appropriate to their stage of development. And so maybe they don't get to learn about Samson until they're a little bit older.
Right.
That'd be a reasonable compromise. Or, like, who are you going to let take your child's innocence from them? Right?
Right. The
Because
innocence
it's like
is
at
going
a
to get
certain
taken.
point, it's going to go if they survive into adulthood, the innocence is going to go. Who's going to be the one supervising like the lowercase t trauma of growing up there? That probably should be like the role of the father and the mother to do that in a time and in a way that is in the best interests of the children rather than by somebody at school, somebody at the internet, So giving them the raw Bible stories and some of these difficult passages, it's probably what's needed by the time they've attained the use of their reason and can have it explained to them.
Right, but that's assuming they know that. Like
Yeah.
the problem is that the adults look at the stories and go, "These will traumatize the children." The adults are wrong about that. It's just
Yeah,
wrong.
it's true.
What happens when you don't know something, when you don't have a frame for it, is you kind of store it for later, and then when you meet it again coming around, maybe it will traumatize you, maybe it won't. Right? You can't tell. And this is the problem. Psychology implies that you can know that, and psychology is completely wrong about that. And to be fair, Freud and Jung knew this, and they were clear about this. It's everybody after them who's retarded, and they're all retarded since then, by the way.
Yeah.
They misunderstood this and said, we can science it, right? Which means because we can see this break in the past in hindsight, we can prevent it by making sure it doesn't happen in the moment, because we're wicked smart, and they're not. They're dumb. And that is actually the problem. This is why children in the Middle Ages were not all traumatized. Like, that didn't happen. They had those stories. The early fairy tales, the like pre-Grimm ones, because there's the Grimm ones, which we think are horrible. And then there's Grimm is sanitized. Like Grimm's fairy tales is sanitized.
Because I'm conflating these with movies. I'm conflating Bible stories with movies, but like fairy tales and Bible stories told to you orally are going to have a different impact on you than watching a scary movie with the intense visuals.
Potentially. But even then, I think the interpretation aspect comes with wisdom, maturity, and parenting, which is why there's such heavy emphasis in the scriptures on leading children astray as parents. The parents lead them astray. The children can't lead themselves astray necessarily so. And this is, I don't want to get into free will, but I'm saying like there's a particular level or path that kids are put onto by parents. And I think that framework that they create at their home, chaos or not, structure or not, totally changes how those stories are given, interpreted, and otherwise, especially if they're editorializing. If they're editorializing, now you have a real burden on your back, as now you are the authority, not the word of God itself being the authority. Right. So I think that framing is super important when it comes to these issues.
Well, and to be fair to Father Eric's point, the problem with a movie, the thing that people, I don't want to say they don't remember this, that's kind of unfair. When you submit to an image, any image, right? We've already got potential, we're already like, wait a minute, right? But when it's a series of images, or even a goofy YouTube channel like The Wonderful Navigating Patterns, what you're doing is you are already giving authority, which is one of those words that no one ever talks about. It's fantastically more important than all the other words anybody's using, to that entity behind the camera, basically, right? The director, roughly speaking. And so what they're doing is they're filling in missing pieces in the fairy tale, right? Those pieces are missing because fairy tales do not translate to screens at all, right? And you kind of know this, right? And it's not just fairy tales. And my favorite example is with I think only one exception, nobody can make an H.P. Lovecraft movie. It's impossible. Right?
Yeah, because he's sitting there saying the
'cause-
very sight of this drove me mad. So you would need to make a movie that would drive people mad when they were watching it.
Right, but like The Color Out of Space, the most recent one with Nicolas Cage, that kind of nailed it. Now, he did change important elements of the story, but holy crap, is that good? But
Yeah, it was
almost
brutal.
no one can ever do it.
Yeah, it was disturbing. Yeah, and it did a good job at portraying that like Lovecraft did.
Oh,
But
it's
even in the case of the I think even in the case of movies like that, now I wouldn't endorse letting children watch them. Never.
no, of
But
course not. Right.
but I think also even in those cases, it doesn't have the damaging effect if the structure and framework are correct in the home.
Bingo.
Well,
It would be, but I still wouldn't endorse it. No way, Jose.
Right.
and,
No.
and to be fair to the creators of Veggie Tales, I think with them they have TV censors, and also even if they didn't have TV censors, they also have potential advertisers they have to, appeal to, who will say, "Oh, you're going to portray this violent event in the Bible? No way, Jose, are we picking that up and airing that on TV?"
Yeah, but
So
that's after it's created. So to be
right, but
fair,
after it's created, they may say, well, we're not going to pick it up.
Yep.
So if beforehand they create it,
but Silas, that happens with most TV projects. This is
Yeah.
what people miss. Like most TVs and movies never make it anywhere near a screen, even ones that have been filmed. And
Sure.
for that reason, because they know advertisers won't pick it up. But that doesn't affect the way they tell the story. But I think, and of course, I agree with Bruce on all of this, right? Like if you have a structure in place, like the trauma doesn't occur, or it's so mitigated that it doesn't matter. I can't hear anything.
I think he's muted.
He must be
When
muted.
I was very young, I watched Pinocchio, right? And then, like, from that time on, I was just kind of scared of the idea of being swallowed alive, right? It's
Mhm.
just that was the
Yeah.
part that got me, right? We fast forward a little bit. We have an N64. We have Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, right? And what's level 3? You guys remember level 3? Level 3's inside Jabu Jabu's belly, right? And then the second that my brother got to that level, I bolted because it terrified
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
I guess what happened after that? I started having more of these nightmares,
Yeah.
right? And it
Of
was
course.
kind of a recurring
Of course.
nightmare until I got to be about 11 or 12 years old,
Mhm.
and I decided I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to beat this level. And I got
Right.
there, and like, I bet you I was sweating bullets. I bet you I made the room stink from my stress sweat. But I
Yeah.
beat the daggone level, and the
Right.
nightmares, I won't say they've like ever entirely gone away, but they're way
Right.
less intense and way less frequent than they
Right.
used to be because I was in a good household. And like,
Right.
even without ever having listened to Dr. Peterson lecture on exposure therapy, I
Right.
understood that the appropriate way to overcome something like this was to face it rather than
Right.
continue running away
Ev-
from it without
Everybody
anybody
did.
ever telling me that because I was in a good family.
Everybody did before psychology, I mean, up to and including allergies. Like my friend's was it his third wife? Uh, she always tells this story, right? She was, I don't know, 40 years old, and she was talking to her mother, and she was like, wow, I just found out I'm allergic to, I forget what it was. It wasn't gluten, but it was like milk or something crazy. And her mother was like, "Oh yeah, you were horribly allergic as a child." And she's like, "What?" And she, "Oh yeah, you'd break out in hives if you had, just a little bit of this." And she's like, "Well, how come I never knew this?" She's like, "Because I fed it to you a little bit at a time when you were a child." Over time, right? Which as science has recently discovered, because it's wicked smart, is the correct thing to do. And it's like, yeah, but everybody already knew that. Like actually, everybody who wasn't uneducated or
So
everybody
this
who
is
wasn't poorly educated by college actually already knew this.
And so this seems to me like the stories that we're telling people that are inevitably going to frighten children, they need to have in it also the ability to
Nope.
be like
Nope.
something that they can
Nope.
encounter and overcome in some way in the
Nope.
world.
No. I know what Bruce said was right. Like the story is a little tiny piece that you get told. And if you have the right framework outside of you, you will integrate it over time. I think the problem with the personal story, see, this is why the personal storytelling garbage, especially on YouTube, is completely just ripping the world apart, right? Because, you tell a personal story of trauma. I could tell you 6 personal stories of trauma. It's not that hard. But wait a minute, so can everybody else, unless they don't remember. And many people don't remember, right? So the thing is, what we're really describing is an actual universal. There's very few universals in this world. Trauma is a universal. Everybody go right. It doesn't matter what happens to you in your life. There's one event that's the worst event that's ever happened to you in your life. Now, and I do know people who literally, I'm not joking, is actually true for them. The worst physical thing that ever happened in their life is they actually stubbed their toe. Like when you just go through their history, that was the most painful event. It was the most shocking. This person in particular ended up going to the hospital, which kind of like it's a toe. The toe wasn't broken, right? So like trauma by definition will happen to everybody, and so like what Bruce is pointing at is super important, right? If you have a trauma that's unresolved or unresolvable, it's because your formation was off. It's not because of the stories you were exposed to. And it's only the ridiculousness of the materialist scientific frame where, again, you've got this hindsight bias. Oh, we see how this happens, which is almost always wrong, by the way, but that's another discussion. It's much longer, right? It's almost always wrong, right? We see usually what they see is a way it happens, not the way it happens. And that might be a hint, right? And therefore, if we take that away, it will never happen. And that's just wrong, right? It's already wrong. And then they try to do that, and then we weaken everybody. Like actually, like and you can see that traces back to the 1930s. That actually traces all the way back to psychology.
That seems to be maybe another reason why we're in the Peterson sphere here, and why we listen to him, is because he doesn't give you that message. He talks about like, look, the best psychological intervention that we could do is exposure therapy. Like that has the best results out of anything, because it makes you stronger. It doesn't make you weaker. That's basically what it's doing for you. So when you say psychology, you're meaning like the pop psychology, my therapist is my priest and my best friend.
All psychology. We could do without psychology. Everything would be fine because we did without it before and everything was fine. Like it's not that hard, right? Like obviously there was a time before psychology. That was most of human history, almost the entirety of it, in fact. And everything was fine. And everything was great and everything was better. You get psychology and things actually start to break down because it's part of what is introduced by the materialism. And that just destroys the world. Materialism just
then I have to conclude that you don't think Dr. Peterson is a psychologist.
No, he is, and he says useful. It's not that you can't use psychology for useful things. It's that, and Peterson talks about this. All the useful things in psychology don't come from psychology. They come from your relationship with the therapist and your exposure to the outside world. That's it. And he says this, right, explicitly. He's explicit not only about that. I mean, it's right in 12 Rules for Life. I'm actually going to do a 12 Rules for Life book club, by the way, the pragmatic approach at some point on navigating patterns. But he says not only exposure therapy, he explicitly talks about participation and the change in framing, right? Like that story with the woman who thought she was like abused by her brother. And then it just turns out that they were like so young that like the way she was thinking about it was wrong. And then you fix that and instantaneously your world changes, right? And like all your problems go away. Yeah, sure, you can do that, but that didn't come from you. It didn't come from your understanding of psychology, and it didn't even come from your therapist's understanding of psychology. And the interesting thing is, and Peterson, to be fair, and Dr. Vervaeke are very clear about this. Psychology as a discipline is non-functional. You can swap out different types of psychology, and it makes no difference. What the effectiveness of psychology tracks with is the relationship between the patient and the doctor. And doctors who are good, it doesn't matter what method they use with their patients, it works. So it's 100% clear from the scientific data that psychology is BS. I'm sorry, but it's 100% clear. And Peterson and Vervaeke, to be fair, understand this and tell you that quite clearly. I get it if you didn't understand it, but they know this and they're clear about it, right from the data, from psychology's own data. And nobody likes to talk about that, of course, because that's their quote discipline. And I'll tell you one thing about the sciences: there's very little discipline in the sciences.
There's
Now,
too much money in it. It's just
so
like
didn't
being
you-
a bishop in the Middle Ages. There was too much money in it for you to actually do a good job.
I don't think that's fair. I think they have too many people trying to do it, and they let too many people do it. And one thing actually that I think is a big factor is, so like, you could talk about psychology as a profession, but it's definitionally not. And I would argue we don't have any more professions, because the last time I checked, and of course everything tries to change all the time, although I doubt the utility of, we'll say, newer definitions of terms. A profession is self-regulating. And Peterson has kind of proven there's no self-regulation in psychology. And to the extent that they're doing it to the wrong people about the wrong issues. And legal is much the same. They're not self-regulating anymore. And so they're not a professional body. And it's just that simple. And that points to more of the problem of we'll say, the meaning crisis, although I'd still argue it's the intimacy crisis, than anything else. And of course, when the professions vanish, you need more legalism. Like, technically that would work. Of course, if the profession that's vanished is the legal profession, and legalism relies on the profession, which, by the way, it does, then that
Canon Law
won't work.
Society of America saves the day.
Right. Well, not so far. But yeah, which is what you see, and that's why you see it. And the explanation is that simple, and no one likes that answer, but also that's definitely the answer. Now we get to see Jean. I haven't seen Jean in ages. How are you doing?
Oh, I haven't seen you either. Good to see you, Mark. I'm doing pretty well. How have things been? I haven't seen you around Bomb. I've seen your live streams pop up on the YouTubes, but I haven't seen you on Bomb.
No, I'm not on Bomb. I got out of that snake pit a long time ago. But I'm sorry to hear you're still there. I'll send flowers, and maybe
I
you
would
need a good
appreciate flowers.
therapist. Maybe that would help. But nothing.
I
The only thing that's
prefer
going to help
flowers.
Bomb is an actual bomb. But hey, whatever. You do you.
Please do send flowers. And I have a bomb-derived question. And well, it's really for Father Eric, for the rest of the Catholics. And the bomb-derived question is: we were talking about Latin America and the way the evangelical church is really sweeping through Latin America. And in North America, Catholicism, like, there's a phenomenon of evangelicals converting to Catholicism. In Latin America, the evangelical church has a pitch to the lower classes, and somebody said like a 90 IQ pitch. And I'm wondering, what would the Roman Catholic 90 IQ pitch be towards the evangelical? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So just to give you some statistics, right now in the United States, the best statistics we have are that for every one convert we get to the church, we lose 8 people.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's bad.
But it's really interesting to note that very often we get the intellectual evangelical types who have do a little bit of study with history. They begin to think that let's say the Zwinglian doctrine of the Eucharist they have at their church is unsatisfactory. They read St. Ignatius of Antioch and begin to believe that the Catholics were right all along. That's a common enough story here in the United States. I'm not going to say that there aren't any intellectuals in the 8 that leave, but a lot of that is more of an indifferent sort of thing.
Right.
So
I could probably
that might actually be
characterize.
part of the problem, John, is that we don't have, and this is actually something that I've been noticing, right? Like when I was at Holy Cross, right? Holy Cross is the biggest parish in Fargo. You've got a lot, like I would say the bulk of it is like nice middle class Midwestern white people. That was kind of the bulk of your parish there. We had some African immigrants, and we had some people that I kind of suspected were a little more working class, but they were very much the minority compared to all of these, mortgage, 2-car payments, and middle class job types that we were getting, which are, they need the gospel too. But
Credit score
it
people.
was me sort of, like how marriage is becoming a middle class luxury now, rather than
Mhm.
just something that people are doing. I'm afraid that like Catholicism is also falling into the same sort of pit, that we don't have that working class outreach and appeal that we're supposed to have, because it's supposed to be for everybody. And there should be a level of engagement with the highest intellects in the church, all the way down to our greeters at Walmart and everybody in between. So that might be a part of the problem right there, John.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So, observing American society in general, people sort along interest groups. And so you have an individual kind of pop into the world and, like, they have a family and things, but then the way they move through the world is very much mediated by their interests rather than a cross-generational structure that orients their life. And so then there's a lot of sorting that happens, and people sort into the various lifestyles they have. And like Catholicism is functionally treated as a lifestyle interest.
Which is
But like,
probably
okay, so
closer to the ancient definition of religion than just a system of beliefs.
Well, I
okay, so
think,
there.
yeah, I'm just going
No,
to
no,
say,
no, go
like,
ahead.
just with regards to Latin America and evangelical converts, my understanding and what I've witnessed there and what I've witnessed with others, I got to be honest, there's not a significant distinction between charismatic evangelical and charismatic Catholic. From my understanding, especially there, most of the Catholics are like liberation slash charismatic Catholics with a bit more syncretism. And so if you have an evangelical position, you're gonna have, it doesn't look much different other than
Well,
the bucking
mhm.
against tradition. So I think there's an easy spot for it to come through that way.
Yeah, no, I think the big answer is that, and Bruce is kind of pointing at that, is that we haven't been consistent to our own traditions, especially the shepherds of the church. We haven't been as serious about our faith as we should be, and that's why people are leaving, is because we're not doing what we should be doing. Like, that's kind of the thing that I don't know. I certainly have my perspective and my understanding on these things. And if people are just leaving in droves from your parish, some of it might be rebellion, but a lot of it might just be the indifference and the laziness of the priests there, or them being possessed by bad ideas, which has happened to plenty. Yeah, it's like
Well,
everywhere,
how do
everywhere. No,
you?
no, no,
Well, I was going to say,
everywhere
how do
that
you combat bad ideas in the Catholic Church
you,
without teaching outside the Mass?
yeah, you give
Well,
people.
you can, right? The teaching is really still not necessary, right? But you need the exemplification, and that is where literally everyone's failing. They're failing in exemplification, and that's a problem, because good exemplification to, say, groups requires organization. And so if you don't have anybody sort of organized enough to bring something together, you're not going to get the exemplification. And with the wave of, to what Sally Joe is kind of pointing out, I think the poverty is piety problem in the United States, which the Catholics very much suffer from. I mean, there's a beautiful basilica in Columbia, South Carolina, and it is not the prettiest church in Columbia by far, until you go inside. And then it's probably pretty close to the Greek Orthodox Church, although I haven't been in the Greek Orthodox Church in some time, so I don't quite remember how pretty that one is. But But like the Greek Orthodox Church on the outside, way prettier than the Basilica is, and there's no reason for that, right? They're hiding from the Protestants for no. I mean, they shouldn't have done that, and so that's a problem when your exemplification is negative or neutral rather than positive and beautiful, right? I mean, if you buy into beauty will save the world, I'm sorry, it ain't going to be the orthos either. They're not going to win that race. The cathedrals are going to win that race.
But I was told the Spirit didn't proceed from the Father and the Son. That's what Ortho Jimmy told me on the internet.
Yeah, but it wouldn't like what people tell you actually doesn't matter at all. It doesn't move you. It's interesting because Homath just tweeted this out today, and I said, "Oh, wait till you find out what charisma can do instead of words." Like, I don't understand. Like, there's plenty of words, and like it ain't working. It hasn't been working. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it clearly doesn't.
Mark, you just
data
quote
there.
Aristotle, who says that thought alone moves nothing.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's like Aristotle already said it. Like, I don't know why we need to say it again. So that's Mark's take on the problem. We're still dealing with the fallout of the Second Vatican Council, and we'll say the poor implementation of the Second Vatican Council in many areas, and the assumption among many of the clergy, especially, that because there was an ecumenical council and people were deciding to change things, that meant that absolutely everything was up for grabs and we could now just go into full revolution mode. And South America got hit really hard with that, with the liberation theology, because Marxism has always been like quasi-religious, and like the main appeal of Marxism was just their fervent piety for the universal brotherhood of man, and their desire to see the world change and all of that.
Right.
And so your liberation theology, which absolutely swept through the church in South and Central America, was just kind of piggybacking off that. And then, as it turns out, the church stinks at politics. Because here's our way of doing politics. We have a Christian king, and then he just takes care of everything for it. Like that's the church's way of doing politics. And when you're dealing with 20th and 21st century democracies, like, actually doesn't work really well. Like, we need to just let the laymen out in the world, we'll give them proper formation, we'll give them proper orientation, and like let them just go kind of hack it out, because the clergy are going to be useless at this. I can tell you that. Like, don't ask me about government. Like, I've paid attention in my government class, but unless it's ecclesial governance, I believe whoever's talking to me at the moment. That's what happens. Which is why I try not to talk about it too much in public forums, because it's not really what people are looking for before. So, yeah. But I am firmly convinced
I agree
that God is doing something with the chaos that came after the Second Vatican Council.
Right.
And whatever needed to be done will be done. And I'll just try and be a good priest in North Dakota.
Well, I would say, too, I think, Pope Francis said this very well about a year ago. He said, today in the Catholic Church, confirmation, the sacrament of chrismation or confirmation, is treated in many ways like a graduation ceremony. Like, it's, oh, okay, there you go. You got your sacraments. Now go out into the world. And the person's like, well, I'm good to go, because they haven't been given a lot of good guidance from certain priests and bishops. So they think, oh, okay, I've been confirmed. They, instead of saying, well, I've received my sacraments of initiation, now how do I expand upon that? They're just kind of patted on the head. So they're like, oh, okay, I got all my stuff. I'm good to go. I got baptized. I did all these other things. So that
went to
means
12 years of Catholic school.
Right. I did 12 years of Catholic school. That means I'm good to go. that means I can, literally do whatever I want now, and it's not going to matter because I already got the Catholic thumbs up. When they're not.
You know, a great way to fix that? Just go back to the restored order, like the magnificent Diocese of Fargo has, and give them confirmation of First Holy Communion in third grade. I
Yeah.
can't possibly interpret it as a graduation at that age.
Right. Well, and I know in some of the Eastern Catholic churches, they give all three to infants. They give the
I
infant.
would 100% do that if I was allowed.
Yeah.
It's not the Western tradition.
Yeah.
I gotta submit myself to the Western tradition, which has associated the sacrament of confirmation with the bishop. So I got to do what I can do. But if the Pope was like, "Hey guys, this is the direction we need to start moving," I'm like, "All right, giving communion to babies now. Big fan. Let's do it."
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a good Eastern Catholic priest. I mean, I'm Eastern Catholic, but there was a good Eastern Catholic priest on Pints with Aquinas, and he basically made the argument that neither the East or the West are wrong on infant communion. The West's perspective is kind of the Thomistic perspective that the Eucharist is kind of a picture of Christ's passions, and because an infant can't comprehend that, that it's harder to give it's harder for the full grace of communion to be communicated to an infant, whereas with baptism the full grace of baptism can be communicated to an infant very easily by the washing. But this Eastern Catholic priest was making a good point that even though the full grace of the Eucharist can't be given to an infant, there are still some blessings that can come from it. So if, say, an Eastern Catholic priest gives the Eucharist to an infant, that infant, it's not like he's committing some blasphemy or some sort of like disgusting sort of blasphemy against the sacrament. There's still a blessing going on, and still an effective blessing going on. So the West's perspective is maybe infants shouldn't get it because they don't get the full grace of it, but the East would say there are still graces, lower graces that can come from that, therefore it's effective.
Well, I think, it would seem to me that even in the East, they have some age of discernment with all the sacraments as well. So, like for confession, for instance, right? So they have babies doing communion on the spoon,
Right.
and baptism at birth, or 8 days, but they don't have confession.
Right.
So there is an age somewhere, and I
Or
don't think that's
marriage.
avoidable in any tradition.
Right.
There's no,
Yeah.
it's unavoidable.
Would it be fair to say that the Western traditions generally place more emphasis on the rational and cognitive faculties of the individual in terms of engaging with the spiritual world?
I think in a
that's
way.
fair
Absolutely.
enough. I mean, we have this whole tradition of the age of reason, and it's not that you're not reasonable as an infant, but it's all in potency there. It hasn't been actualized enough yet to where it can be used. And so it's like, it's basically a commonly understood doctrine in the West that by the age of 7, all children will begin to have use of their reason, unless there's a profound disability, but those are exceptions, so we don't worry about that too much. I'm not aware of that same sort of emphasis being placed in the East, or that same sort of rule being placed in the East. I can imagine, I'm just imagining here, so Silas might have to fill us in here,
Sure.
that like the formation for confession might be a little bit more, well, ask the priest to see if little it's a good Greek name.
Basil.
If little Basil's ready for confession, and then Father Papadopoulos will talk to little Basil here and see if he's ready for confession, versus like okay, now we're doing our program for first confession for all of our second graders, which is kind of the way we do things here. So
Yeah.
So there's probably something there. I don't think we need to emphasize it any more than it already is.
Right.
But yeah, there might be something to it.
Right. Well, I
That's
think
weirdly
Okay.
that's weirdly inconsistent.
Well, I would say
Like-
too with the Thomistic theology, Thomism is largely about the interior act of the will and the passions and whatnot, and there's a big emphasis on that in the Western Church in many regards, which you see a little bit of in the East, but you don't see it as much emphasized in the East.
What are these graces of the Eucharist that would only be accessible through rational cognition?
The ability to know that you are receiving and adoring your Lord in in his Eucharistic presence.
Yep.
Right.
It's
So
exactly what,
there's a higher participation that is available.
well,
But the
there's an
child-
examination. There's an examination of oneself before they partake, as Paul states it. So
Right.
you have to, now the examination of oneself is individualistic. It's determined by the clergy and elders. But at some point, a child must be held accountable. And that age is, traditionally, different depending on culture and church. So
Right,
that
when it-
The age of First Communion was like in the 12 to 14 region for a lot of the later Middle Ages, until St. Pius X in the early 20th century brought it down to the age of 7, which was a little more traditional, I think. Actually.
But that's weirdly inconsistent on a lot of fronts, right? Like, first of all, the idea that it wouldn't be different when you're younger is dumb. Like, everything is different when you're actually everything is different when you're
Right.
younger, right? Like your amount of free will, your bodily autonomy, like everything. So, like, people always legalize this, and I'm like, why are you trying to make this the same at all ages? Like, that's just dumb. But it's completely inconsistent to say, well, you have to comprehend some aspect of grace in order to receive it. That's not at all how grace works ever, right? And everything
Mark, it sounds
comes-
like you're doing
Well,
theology right there. You've been
I
told
would-
not to do theology on this podcast.
I would agree.
that's not theology either.
Okay.
That's
Grace
just-
isn't theology. Alrighty.
No,
Very
that's
good.
just
Glad to hear it.
that's just statements. That's just statements right out of the Bible. So
Yeah.
it's not
Okay,
unclear.
and when we're Bible doesn't have
We're
anything to do with
spacious.
theology. Got it.
Yeah, but talking about the Bible, talking about anything about the Bible also cannot be theology. So
Right.
that's why the Protestants can't do theology, but always refer to it, right? Because
Right.
they don't have a theological tradition to discuss, and therefore
Oh, yeah.
there's no such thing as theology in Protestant land.
Right. I was just on a debate with a couple people, and this one angry Baptist came out like, Catholics don't understand the gospel. And I said, okay, how do Catholics not understand the gospel? And he's like, I'm not going to tell you. You should know better. And I'm like, okay.
I'm not stupid enough to make that statement.
Right.
You can meet really stupid Catholics on the internet too. Let's be
Well,
fair.
sure.
That is true. I will say the Baptists did solve this conundrum of age. They stated, get baptized, and then when you're baptized, you take communion. But baptism happens when you can discern. And so
Right.
both of them come together.
There's a nice consistency in the Baptist position.
Right.
Yeah,
Not
there's a
saying
lot
that
of
it's consistent,
consistencies there. It's
it's
not
consistent.
traditional, and it's
Here's-
also kind of it's Baptist is it's novel all the way around. Like, it's not even reformational, largely speaking, at least in regular practice. So, but in that sense, they solved that issue to some degree.
If you want consistency, they solve that issue. If you
Right.
want consistency, you're also an idiot. But yes, sure.
But
They
here's
solve
the
a
other thing.
consistency issue.
But here's the
That's the
other thing too with communion versus baptism. Communion is a sacrifice. I mean, it's the sacrifice of the Mass. And so St. Thomas would make the argument that the Eucharist is kind of a picture of Christ's passions on the cross. And so in being that it's a sacrifice, it's also a self-offering. The person who's participating it is also engaging in a self-offering. And to self-offer yourself, there does have to be some sort of communicative cognitive sense there. Whereas with baptism is not a sacrifice in the same way, which is why you can say with baptism, okay, it doesn't matter whether a person is cognizant enough to understand a baptism or not. When it's also worth noting, St. Thomas also says each sacrament is supposed to communicate grace in its own measure. And so when you take the Eucharist, Christ's passions are being communicated to you, which it's hard to communicate to a baby. But when you baptize a baby, there's still
You're
a
incorporating
grace.
them into the covenant.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
and a
it's a sign.
baby can still sense water on his or her head, and still kind of understand that as a habit of grace. Because
I think the emphasis on the understanding is a little bit like that's not really, because that's part of the reason why baptism is efficacious, right? Like the baby really doesn't have much to say about it, but the priest and those who are responsible for the child, either ideally its parents, but occasionally other people, they're the ones who make the decision that the child is going to be integrated into the covenant of Christ and his blood there, which is, I think, the big reason. I mean, that, and it communicates the supernatural habits of faith, hope, and charity to the child. Even if they have no capacity to use it yet, they'll be just kind of waiting, in the magazine, ready to be shot at the appropriate time when they begin to learn about God and the Bible and all of that. So I think rather than focusing on the child's understanding of their own baptism, we should focus on the integration of the child into the covenant by the will of their parents and the action of the church there. I think that'd be the more appropriate focus there,
Yeah, the
which
sign.
actually argues better for the delaying of confirmation and first Holy Communion,
Right.
because confirmation is the perfection of baptismal graces. It's why we use oil for it. It seals in the graces the same way that you can season a cast iron pan and seal in the steel against the attacks of the water and the rust. And then the Eucharist being the communion of the soul with Christ there. So that's a defense of the Catholic of the Western tradition, I think. That being said, the ancient tradition, East and West, was one night, one rite, all ages. So if the West decided that we wanted to return to that, I would just go right along with it. But right now, I think we got bigger fish to fry, so I'm not going to worry about it.
Well, I want to point out one very, very, very common confusion in what I call the age of gnosis, right? Where we're just relying on propositions as knowledge. Communication is not only speaking, and it's not only the understanding of language. In fact, almost everything is was not conveyed to you by language. Like, that didn't happen to you, regardless of what you may think about it. It's actually very easy to prove. Like, most of the movements you make with your body were done through mimicry. It had nothing to do with language. Nobody told you what moving your arm up was and how to do it in words. Like, that didn't happen. And most of the things because I would argue all knowledge is through participation, happen as the result of mimicry, as the result of participation in things like liturgy and tradition, and have nothing to do with what you've read or what you've heard in a classroom or what you've had for a conversation. And I think that once you see the world that way, everything changes. And the fact that more conversation via the internet has led to nothing but worse problems, by everyone's admission, although they won't tie it back to the internet, even though they say it's social media or something, as if that's not part of the internet or something. That happened. Like, it definitely happened. It continues to get worse the more people talk. That's still true. It's still happening, right? Not always. You can have careful enough conversations, but participation is the way out. And so communication, like participating through communication, still conveys something, or rather, sorry, communicating through participation so conveys something. And you don't need a cognitive faculty of language to get that. And that participation, especially if it is repeated or understood later on in life, which I think it can be because you grow up and you understand more as you grow up, can still be useful even if you don't understand the whole thing when you first encounter it. And that changes the way you think about not just this issue, but like actually childhood development and human development all throughout your life. And I think that's super important to keep in mind because people aren't considering that possibility.
That sounds very Gerardian, actually. Like the part about like learning through mimicry and participation.
Well, Gerard
Oh,
doesn't
I
talk
guess
about learning at all through mimicry. Gerard just uses mimicry as the bad guy and says a bunch of stupid things about it. Also, he's not wrong about most of what he says. He's just satanic. Different problem.
I don't know what you mean by that. But
yeah, I would think that Piaget would be a um, more reliable guide to that early childhood development. But the
Yeah.
best, of course, is Monica Montessori, criminally underappreciated here in the United States. And those who think they appreciate her are usually just a bunch of hippies. Either that or they're Catholic. So, uh, yeah, no, one of these days I'm going to talk to my friend who is a principal of Montessori school, and I'm going to have him explain it in detail. But Mark, you'd be all like, what do you maybe I don't know if you know anything about the Montessori method, but it's like
I went to a
100%.
Montessori school.
Okay, all right, so you know how hands-on it is.
Oh, it's
That's why you're
insane.
such
It's
yeah,
nuts. Yeah.
and it's like it's really funny. I'll go over to the same guy, the principal. Like I go over to his house for supper. They have me over. They're good Catholics. They feed the priest. They get they understand the assignment. And like the kids are like, "Oh, it's time to set the table," and then they just go and like set the table because that's what they do at school. Is they set their own table with real, with a plate and a fork and a knife and a spoon and a napkin.
Do stuff.
It's like,
Do stuff. Do
Think
stuff.
we-
wow.
Here's this stuff. Like
Yeah.
I remember, and I was in a Montessori school when I was like 4 years old, so not even school age yet. But I remember distinctly figuring out, like I was sharpening a pencil, and I figured out how to count to 1,000, and then bang, I got infinity. Like I was like, oh, I see how this all works now. And I remember it like it was yesterday, and I can still sing Frere Jacques in French because that was one of the things they taught us in Montessori school. But it was all rooms of a big old style Victorian house. If my memory isn't betraying me, it might be, but I don't think so. And my Snoopy lunchbox, of course, was blue, of course, and how all the rooms had something different going on, but it was very participatory, like it was fantastically participatory, which isn't bad. And if you want to understand more about the impact of what I was saying in general, you can look at Dale Farron, the work of Dale Farron. This is just like monster work that everyone's ignoring. She's collected all the data. If you send kids and talk to them and school them behind a desk too early, they have bad outcomes all around by any measure, right? Or if you do too much of it, right, which we have done in the US, right? We took religion out of schools. Yes, that was bad. The sneaky part, if you want to call this satanic, that would be more accurate, or Luciferian, is that we also took gym, art, music, and recess out of schools. Not entirely, but we reduced the numbers on all of those in favor of the more materialistic, more Otto von Bismarck method of behind a desk talking to people and making them read books, which is actually not great, guys. Dale Farron's got the goods on this, and that has actually caused some significant portion of the problems we talk about in quote modernity, which age of gnosis is a better term, right? And that's part of where the materialism and the severe fundamentalism, the most fundamentalist people in this country are not religious; they're scientific, and they claim to be atheists or agnostics, and that's where that comes from largely.
Yeah, and So I'm a big fan of the Montessori project. I am not a fan. This is what my buddy who was a principal told me, is that unfortunately in the United States they take the idea of liberty of the child and like make that so they just, in some places, not every Montessori school, where they just don't discipline the children at all. And then, we went to a fundraising banquet for this school, and they brought in an experienced Montessori teacher who had studied all these things. And like, well, okay, we do like have a certain amount of bounded liberty for the children. Like they could work on this, or they could work on that, or they could work on the third thing. And then like, if they've got a little too much energy, maybe we'll give them a chore to do in order to like like they can go sweep the floor or something, so there is, a liberty, but it's like, it's a liberty within constraints, not just you're a perfect little Rousseauian child who just needs your shackles taken off so that you can manifest your excellence to the world. So all of that to say, I would like to see Montessori schools with integrated with Catholic Montessori schools. I just want them to win. I want them to be available to everybody, and yeah. So
Well,
thought,
and that's sad, right? Because when I was going to Catholic school, their focus was on getting you into college, and that they were filtered for that. Like, I mean, the only reason I got in was because I destroyed the test and annihilated it, and probably made it harder for everybody ever to get back into that school. I mean, I smoked the numbers completely, but I was lazy and never did my homework, and I was the non-ideal student. Let me tell you, all throughout being in school, like I did not like homework, and yeah, I mean, but I mean, it was really good for me, and certainly the school didn't mind having me there or anything, but they really went, and like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but yeah, certainly the focus should be on letting kids play and run around and do art and music and recess and gym rather than anything else. And yeah, keep the teaching. The religious teachings are very symbolic, and that's the big attraction for people who like Pageau, is he's very symbolic, and they just never learned any symbolic stuff, and so it's like, or they did, and it wasn't complete.
yeah. So big fan of that.
I
Big
think
fan of
Gene, while he was off camera, turned into G.K. Chesterton with the pipe and the hat.
Well, I, we actually had a fabulous day for early March here in Fargo. Got above 50 degrees. I went out and got some sunshine. I might have a little more color in my face today. And so I did take an opportunity to smoke the last pipe of the year before going into the 40 days of Lent, and doing penance. And one of the penances is going to be not engaging in God's gift to Virginia. So
Well, one of the
Wow.
wonderful things about being reformed is we'll smoke a cigar to the glory of God every evening, regardless of the season.
I happen to think that the seasons of fasting and feasting make glory to God too. So
That's true. I don't disagree.
yeah,
You gotta have a
Um,
but
good
you don't have
fast.
some man in Rome telling you when to do it, huh?
That's true. It's worse. I have a man very close to me telling me what to do.
Oh,
Well, the Catholics have both. So.
are you reformed?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
You're allowed to not be a Catholic on this podcast. In fact, I believe you and I are the only Catholics here. So
Jean was a Catholic, wasn't he? Was he not?
No. I evangelical turned Episcopalian.
Hey, what's up? Thank you.
To Sally's point, I am down in Texas and I'm feeling confident in my lack of winterness.
Dude, I'm in Maryland and it's 24 today.
Yeah, but you're in
colder in
Maryland.
Maryland than it is in North Dakota.
Wow.
That's wacky right there.
Now, Mark, are you a
That's the
Catholic?
World Cup.
No.
No, you're not Catholic. Okay.
but he wants everybody to be Catholic. So, and he also wants the Catholics to be better.
I don't care if everybody becomes Catholic.
So do I.
I'm
I actually subscribe to being a Catholic as well, but you won't have me, and I won't have you.
no, the
Well, that
Catholics
sounds like
would
a
take
problem.
you. The Catholics take everybody. It's everybody else who doesn't take the Catholics. That's what's so funny.
Let me ask you a question, Bruce. Are you Calvinist?
If you're Reformed, you are, but I don't call myself a Calvinist because I don't live in Geneva in the 16th century.
Because I was
But-
going
But
to say,
he could, unlike
yes.
everybody else who claims to be a Calvinist who couldn't, because
I was
Yeah,
going to
I
say
mean-
Calvin kind of took notes from St. Thomas Aquinas. He kind of was like,
Yeah,
kind of
sure.
was like,
Well, I'm actually not an Aquinas guy, a Thomas guy at all. I do understand that though, but yeah, I'm a Vantillian. So like we have big discrepancies there, but I do appreciate Aquinas's work a lot, and so did Calvin. And Calvin also had massive respect for the early church and quoted Chrysostom more than any other early church father.
Mm.
You know, so like the man was well learned and well read, and most people today, if they call themselves a Calvinist, what they really just mean is they're a MacArthurite, which is they believe in predestination and they're a Baptist.
right.
You know, that's no one's
Well,
really a
Catholics
Calvinist.
believe in predestination, not in the sense that Calvinists do, though.
Sure, yeah.
It depends on the Calvinist. But I believe in certain types of predestination. And I believe that this podcast is predestined to end at 9:30 Central Standard Time. And I believe we
No,
conceded
that's now.
that. It's dark outside and rational creatures go to bed under
Okay.
such circumstances. So good night and God bless you all.
See you later.
God bless you
All right.
too.